Hi everybody, so this is MK Ultra, one of my black cats. I have two. He's almost a year old, and then I have about a 4-year-old black cat. So yeah, this is him. You might have heard him before in some of the videos. He's very talkative. And then, so I'm not going to do no update on 3 Atlas. I'm going to do some more research and make another video, and probably the next one. And this one, I want to cover the biblical flood. But first, this is A.R.S.E, it's a random son who explains. Hi everybody. And then, yeah, so I mentioned it before about the Libyan army being part of the 10 plagues. So I want to start with the first plague, which was blood. So what that's a reference to, real quick. So I want to start in 1215 BC and work my way down to 1177 BC, which is where the 10 plagues supposedly took place. So here's what happened in 1215 BC. Paris of Troy steals Helen, takes her back. Agamemnon, the brother of the man who had his wife stolen, raises the largest army the world had ever seen, sacks Troy. I think this happened around 1208 BC, and here's why. In 1207 BC, you have the first sea people invasion of West Asia. So that coincides, or comes right after the fall of Troy. So in Turkey, on the Aegean Sea, you have the city of Troy, which was part of the Hittite Empire. They fall. Agamemnon's army just didn't disappear after they sacked Troy. They made their way down West Asia towards Egypt, moving south. So after the Hittites, which was Troy, was a part of, the Akkadian Empire fell, which was where most of this history comes from, because all their tablets got burned and hardened, and there's, like I've said before, there's literally tens of thousands of tablets from the Akkadian Empire alone from this time period. So like I said, this is about 1207 BC. After the Akkadians came the Phoenicians, most of the city of Tyre, that fell, and then some of the coastal cities that were attached to it, all that fell. After the Phoenicians, you come to Egypt. So this is 1207 BC, and Ramses stops them right there. Okay, so here's where the 10 plagues come in, and Moses. So if you saw my other video on Moses, he didn't exist. He's based on a man named Sargon the Great, which existed 2,000 years before this. Before the sea people invasion, I would say it was about 1,000 years. He existed before that. And then, so anyway, Sargon the Great was the basis for Moses, and he really existed. Moses never existed. So the first plague, like I said, was blood. That is more than likely the second sea people invasion. So there was a second one 40 years after the first one. That 40 years is where, in the story of Moses, you get the 40 years wandering the desert. So anyways, so the second sea people invasion, Ramses III set a trap and killed a large amount of the sea people invasion invaders. So much so that the Nile River turned red from the blood. So that's where the first plague comes from, the blood. The second one, the frogs, more than likely was a result of all that blood in the water, which drove all the wildlife out of the river and onto the shores. So that's the second plague. The third plague was the gnats, more than likely fleas from the dead sea people invaders who were dying, so all their parasites left because there was a dead host. The fourth one, flies, same thing with all those dead bodies, there would be flies. And it happens. Livestock, so they would have fell victim to the fleas and flies and stuff, the numerous that were feasting on the dead and, fleeing the dead, would of course got the livestock. So that's 5 of the 10 plagues. The 6th one boils on the people. The fastest way to contaminate a source of water is to put a dead body in it. So that's what happened to the Nile, the main source of water for the people of Egypt. And so over time they also got sick. Hail. So this is, like I said, it was a 40-year period between the two sea people regions. Sorry about that. So I'm thinking that either there was a really cold winter somewhere in those 40 years, or it's a reference to a meteor shower that took place 2,000 years before the sea people invasion. So the Egyptians were aware of meteor showers and that they were celestial in origin, dating back like 4,400 years, which would have been 2400 BC or around there, about 1200 years before the sea people invasion. So they were aware of meteor showers. Anyways, also the hail, it was either a cold winter or meteorites. The locust. So this is where it gets interesting. The locust, I think, is a reference to the sea people invaders themselves. They were so numerous. So like I said, Agamemnon, after he sacked Troy, he had raised the largest army the world had ever seen, according to the myth of Troy. Those people didn't just disappear. They worked their way down south towards Egypt, and became the sea people invaders. If you look up sea people invaders, there's no, supposedly their origin is a mystery. But like I said, I just think it was the remnants of Agamemnon's army working their way down south towards Egypt. What else? So yeah, that's 1208 BC, Troy falls. 1207 sea people invasion. 1177 was the second sea people invasion of Egypt, which coincided with Libya's invasion of Egypt, but it wasn't a coincidence. As I said before, they invaded alongside the sea people invaders of Egypt. Egypt defeats all its enemies, places the sea people invaders in Gaza, which was an old Egyptian fort. So back to the locusts. The sea people were so numerous they were referred to as locusts because they just ravaged the countryside all the way from Turkey and the Aegean Sea all the way down to the shores of the Nile. They just completely devastated that whole region of West Asia. The darkness, that was plague number 9. So this is actually based on an actual event in 1207 BC. So coinciding with the first sea people invasion, there was a solar eclipse. Hold on, he wants to go out. I'll let him out right now. And then, so plague 10, the firstborn, that ties into the Libyan cult of the rat, which is the cult of their army. They practiced nighttime warfare. That was their specialty. And I think that it was just an act of terrorism by the Libyans in 1177, where they invaded Egypt overnight and killed as many people as possible. So there's that. The Red Sea being parted by Moses. Like I said, Moses wasn't there. He never existed. The Red Sea being parted had partly something to do with the number of dead being so numerous that you were able to walk across the dead like a bridge. So there's that. So like I said, the 10 plagues kind of happened. Like I said, they weren't divine in nature though. There was just consequences of a very large and deadly battle in both 1207 and 1170 BC, which happened to coincide with a bunch of other events, which all led to what was known as the Bronze Age collapse. So like I said, it's if you have to piece together like a bunch of different myths, records from, it would be count the Greeks, which at this time they would have just been Proto-Greeks, and referred to by the Egyptians as the Palimpsest. You're counting 6 civilizations: the Greeks, like I mentioned, Hittites, Akkadians, Phoenicians, Egyptian, and then actually the Sumerians were involved too. They got pushed back all the way back into Mesopotamia, all the way back to Iraq. So, like I said, all these kingdoms, except for the Sumerian and the Egyptian, collapsed and were devastated, never to be heard from again. And like, yeah, so like I said, the biblical Exodus the whole chapter is a condensed version of about say about 1200 years of West Asian history, starting with Sargon the Great, who Moses is based on, all the way to the fall of to the Sea People invasion and their defeat by Ramses III. Okay, so I guess that's my little talk on the 10 plagues. Like I said before, the Bible, the stuff kind of happened, and it kind of happened in a different. Uh, in reality, it happened a lot different than it's described in the Bible, which didn't get the Torah, anyways, wasn't started to be written until 300 BC, which is 900 years after the Sea People invasion. So there's that factor too. Is 9 centuries of distortion. If you know about the whispering game, where the message gets distorted over time from one end to the other, being whispered person to person. That's kind of what happens to history, and it takes a lot of some dedication by a lot more people than myself to kind of figure out what really happened. So the solar eclipse happened in 1207 BC. That's real. The Sea People invasion is real. Troy is real. And like I said, this all happened from 1215 BC to 1177 BC, which is about a 48-year period. You have the Bronze Age collapse, Sea People invasion, the Exodus story, in quotation marks, all happening in that time frame. All right. Well, I want to say good night. I want to take care of my cat, and namaste. Like, share, and subscribe, and thank you for watching.